Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, I'd like this to be like a part two, just a little follow up to the last video I just did on Chad Daybell. Okay, I want this to sort of be kind of a deep dive as we're sort of following the trial that's going on right now. Okay, and I also want this to be a follow up to a video I did about last year, maybe 8 months ago, following the Braxton Southwick interview on the Hidden True Crime channel. Okay, because at about that time, I was sort of recovering from watching Lori in her sentencing and just being struck, I thought, by how honestly mentally ill I thought Lori seemed, how honestly delusional she seemed. And I think what really struck me, in contrast to Zulema Pastenis and Melanie Gibb and other people that I thought they seem a little to have some too much vanity invested in their religious activities, that I had trouble taking them seriously. And at least in the case of Lori, I was struck. I was kind of surprised at how honest she seemed to really hold her religious beliefs. Okay. And I think over time, I've come to just kind of accept that I think Chad Daybell also has, regardless of what we can say about his personality, he does seem to, at least in the department of his beliefs, he seems to have very honest beliefs. Okay. But as I go further, looking at his demeanor in the trial and just kind of doing my own research, I'm starting to sort of care less about how honest the beliefs are, because I'm seeing other issues. Okay, other issues that I think go to both Lori and Chad's honesty. Their honesty. In other words, you can have honest beliefs, but you may not be an honest person. You see, in the last video, I talked about how I thought Chad was kind of avoidant and kind of escapist, that I could see things kind of avoidant and escapist in Chad. But I really didn't fundamentally confront the question of whether he himself is an honest person. And I think probably for 80% of people watching this trial, I think they already can tell that Chad is a deeply dishonest person. So I don't even know who I'm really talking to here, because I think we all kind of sense the dishonesty. But I think it's important to talk about it very openly, because Chad, I think he's very cunning, and he's very almost kind of effective. I don't know if he's 100% effective. He doesn't fool me, but he does create kind of a smokescreen with his demeanor, where he seems to have a very humble and earnest and kind of almost kind of like model Mormon from 1937, or like he seems to project this image of somebody who's from like, from like the 1940s or the 1950s. He's kind of bizarre like that, but he projects this image, a very powerful image of being sort of this earnest, humble Mormon guy. And so I think we do have to kind of, at least I do, I have to kind of like kind of like recover and renew and remind myself that this guy is really, really not an honest person. And I think we can also say the same thing about Lori. I was impressed in her defense. I'm sorry, in her the sentencing hearing, where she gave her little speech and stuff. I mean, I thought she was crazy. I mean, she sounded crazy, but it struck me that it seemed like she had very honest beliefs. Okay, however, when we look at Lori, also just in the way she conducts herself and the way she deals with people, she is a deeply dishonest person. Okay, so we have to be kind of careful, because people can have very honest beliefs, honest delusions, you might say, but they can also be deeply dishonest people. Okay, and I think that also has to inform us, even if I do adopt a belief as a person, okay, does it come from the machinery of dishonesty? Okay, the machinery of dishonesty in me is trying to avoid things that I'm not comfortable with, and trying to avoid having to be accountable for things that I'm really not comfortable with. Okay, so then it might make it easy for me to sort of, I become almost like Velcro, where I'm almost like Velcro to like have things stick to me, maybe ways of thinking that sort of help me avoid, you know what I mean? So you can adopt an honest belief, or you can end up with an honest belief that comes from the machinery, the mechanism of dishonesty. So I think we ought to acknowledge when someone has an honest belief, because that does put them in a category. But then the next question is there a dishonest mechanism in how people acquire their beliefs? You see what I'm saying? So I'd like to kind of focus, at least right now. I'll talk later about Lori. I think a lot of people who know this case can see that Lori is just a deeply dishonest and manipulative and sly person. Very, very sly, very comfortable in dishonesty. It's almost like a sport that comes very naturally to her. I think we can also see that Chad, in kind of a different way, Chad is more of a coward. Chad is a very weaselly, very, very deceptive very kind of devious kind of guy. But I think that doesn't come because Chad sits in a dungeon and he wants to be a mastermind of the black arts. I think it's because Chad is such a coward that he just doesn't have the manliness and the fortitude and the courage to just frontally, discuss his issues and to frontally, confront people with whatever he feels is the truth. And so for him with Chad, because he's such a coward, I think the deviousness is just because he has this terror of actually directly facing people as a man with courage. Okay, so I think Chad has that problem of dishonesty. A lot of it comes from just basic cowardice. Okay, and basically not knowing how to manage his personal issues. Which include, I think, some very very problematic, very Machiavellian willfulness. Okay, so I do think Chad has willfulness, and I think he's very stubborn, but I think he just doesn't have the fortitude as a man to bulldoze his stubbornness by directly confronting people. So he goes with this extreme deviousness. Okay. Anyway, so let's just look at Chad for a second. And we can all see that he lies a lot, right? Everybody knows that when he called that funeral home to make these weird inquiries about Charles Vallow and maybe to try to influence a very quick cremation of Charles Vallow, obviously he's being dishonest, but I don't think that helps us understand how fundamentally dishonest Chad Daybell is, right? Obviously he told a lot of lies to a lot of people, but I think we can always question whether he told those lies, let's say, in the service of like a higher plan, like maybe he feels he's on this holy mission, and so he has to tell a few lies, and so we sort of understand that he may have to tell a few lies even in his worldview, even in his in his subjective reality, where he thinks he's on a higher mission. However, there are a couple areas where I think Chad shows, at least to me, that a lot of his lies, I don't know. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say, I think a few of his lies indicate to me that he just has a deep comfort zone. He's very comfortable being extremely deceptive to people that are very close to him, okay, including his children. Okay, this is the important thing. And I think where it really started to become evident to me that Chad really knows how to betray trust. In other words, Chad can live a double life where even to the people that are closest to him, okay, even to the people that are closest to him, he presents an image and he portrays an image and he makes representations that he privately is using to manipulate them or to deceive them. Okay. Now, one of the first ones that I thought was interesting was when Chad got into a fight with Lori. Lori supposedly is the person he holds at the highest level. He thinks she's a goddess. He holds her on the highest pedestal. But we'll notice that with Lori, when they got in a fight, Chad, I don't know, like maybe he believed it, maybe he was in a delusion, but I think this was basically manipulating. He goes, I'm not manipulating. He says that, but he says, I had a communication with my grandfather Keith, my grandpa Keith, and that's Chad's grandfather, I think, Chad's grandfather. And basically trying to make Lori feel bad, saying you have no protection, you have no spiritual protection unless you get nice to me and send me a nice emoji and sort of fall back in love with me, whatever, because they just had a big fight, right? And then he says, I'm not being manipulative. Okay, so right there we can see that Chad is so manipulative that he probably is not fully aware of how manipulative he is. And I think Chad may be in a bizarre way that I guess only the most manipulative people can experience. He probably genuinely believed a little bit what he was saying because he's so caught up in his own manipulation. He's such a natural manipulator. But basically, he was basically using he was making representations to Lori that could really threaten her. Okay, and I think Chad also is very inspired because I think he knows that Joseph Smith, maybe in the history, he had also put major guilt trips on women that he was around. Because I guess Joseph Smith had a lot of problems. The people who know the Mormon history better than I do, they'll know this better than I do. But I think Joseph Smith had a lot of problem with all the women that he was managing. Okay, and I think a lot of women kind of gave him a little bit of pushback. And I think Joseph Smith put a lot of guilt trips on the women around him to sort of keep them close to him and to sort of prevent betrayal. And so he would use like the idea that if you're not in a good way with me, you're going to have trouble in the afterlife, and you're going to be sort of condemned as a soul, basically. And he was doing kind of the same thing to Lori, Chad was, where he was basically taking that theme, and I think he may have picked it up just in the folk tradition and the ethos of the sort of the old time Mormon culture, basically, that it's okay to sort of guilt trip a woman. And he had done that with his wife Tammy in the past, right? But guilt tripping her with this mammoth, huge threat to her spiritual well-being, knowing that Lori was very concerned about her spiritual well-being at this time, right? Because this is a very critical time where they think they're heading into end times, right? And they have to really, let's say, be on the good side, So Chad basically makes Lori think that she may be without spiritual protection, very critical. And to a person in a delusion like Lori was, that was a heavy manipulation device, And so even if Chad sort of believed it in a way, I think we can see that belief came through pure Machiavellian power play, right? And so basically, he maybe was not aware of it 100%, but there was a dishonest and manipulative mechanism operating where Chad was betraying somebody, with untruth and manipulation, who was supposedly his favorite person at that time. So even the person that he held in the highest regard, Lori, in the right moment, he could be making representations to her that came from a mechanism of, I think, extreme dishonesty and manipulation. Okay, likewise, I was really surprised with the testimony in the trial last week of Alice and Todd Gilbert. Okay, Alice and Todd Gilbert, I think, are people that were either neighbors or they were in the same ward, in the same Mormon community. And I think they were very close, or at least they were on good terms with Tammy, right? And they were very suspicious about Chad because, Chad came to them, I think Chad believing he had all this confidence with Alice and Todd Gilbert, but basically telling them, kind of maybe revealing too much, I think in the years before Tammy died, but revealing a lot about his private ideas about the end of the world and how he thought, he was part of the, like, say, the 144,000 or whatever. And so I think that Alice and Todd Gilbert were very good witnesses. But what really struck me about Alice and Todd Gilbert was that Chad had been very open to them about how he thought Tammy was going to die young. She was going to die before her 50th birthday. Okay. And I think that really struck Alice and Todd Gilbert. But what was really interesting was that after Tammy died, Todd Gilbert was actually at the home of the Daybells, right? And so he was in close proximity with Chad and his children. All right. And he just straight up came to Chad and did something that's not in Chad's nature. Chad likes to do everything kind of like through cowardice, very indirect. But Todd Gilbert went right up to him and said, "Hey, so your premonition came true." And Chad said, "Yes." But then he got really uncomfortable because he made it clear to Todd that his children shouldn't be, picking up that conversation because his children didn't know about it, right? So that right there tells me that Chad is kind of doing that deceptive thing where he's really managing what he tells people, okay? And he didn't have the guts. He's too much of a coward. And I think this is the thing, can you really say that this is in the interest of a higher plan, that he can't even tell his children that he's harboring this premonition about their mother? You could argue, well, that's so sensitive. He's going to hurt their feelings. He's going to scare them, but I think a truly honest person wouldn't be so avoidant. I think a truly honest person would say, hey, I have something to tell the family, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think Chad, he just kind of harbored it privately, and he sort of just, in that very dishonest way, like a lie by omission. He never told his children, and obviously never told Tammy, And so I guess I'm thinking that a more honest prophet, I guess, would maybe be more honest about his premonitions with the family, although he'd have to be very diplomatic, right? But still, always saying, hey, I could be wrong, or maybe it's a sign because we could change something, we could avoid it, But I think Chad, he kind of fell in love with his premonition. I think he wanted it to be true, okay? And so I think when you look at all these things, I see this kind of Machiavellian kind of, he's sort of falling slave, I think, to the basic desire where, I think basically he had this carnal desire that he kind of wanted his wife out of the picture, right? And like a good, sly, dishonest person, a good Machiavellian, he just found it very expedient, very convenient for his children not to know about it, right? So that's the kind of dishonesty that's so close to his closest circles of intimacy. the people that he holds with the highest regard and the highest trust. People like Lori, he could really operate with her, in a really fundamentally Machiavellian, dishonest manner. But he could also do the same thing with his children and his wife. Okay, and these are the people that are very close to him, right? And the other thing, let's see, what was I going to say about that? Sorry, I get a little bit hung up. Okay, well, I'll come back in a second. But basically, he could be very terribly dishonest and terribly disloyal. I think, yeah, I guess I don't know if it's disloyal or, well, he could really betray the trust of people that were very close to him, and sort of in the interest of his sort of Machiavellian intentions, you know. And really, at the bottom of it, I think he was just harboring, I think, and really falling in love with this idea that his wife was going to be out of the picture. Okay, and if we combine that with people that knew Chad, like say in in these prepper organizations, a lot of people got the impression that Chad really didn't have the highest regard for his wife, Tammy, and that he was kind of bored with her. Okay, I can't remember the woman who's married to whoever Little Bear. She's a half Navajo who was involved in these prepper groups, and she really had the impression when she first sort of got to know Chad that he really seemed to be openly not very happy or kind of bored with his wife, and he would really kind of openly make really kind of off-color comments and really poor taste comments about his wife. Okay, so anyway, bottom line is, all this speaks of a person who's just not very honest about his personal situation, where he's sort of portraying it in the framework of like prophecy. He's basically having a typical feeling of a typical 40-something-year-old guy in a midlife crisis who's having ambivalence about his wife, and he just doesn't have the guts. And he can be so dishonest that even with his children, not really revealing that. The other thing too, when Chad said that he felt like Harry Potter, and he described his whole family as being like a bunch of boring people sort of holding him down, I don't think Chad ever had the guts to tell even his children that he was harboring these attitudes about the whole family, not just Tammy, that even the children were sort of regarded as part of this boring group that I'm tied to, when I could be doing better things. So I think in that sense, that's also very dishonest. Okay, sorry about those dogs. I'm so embarrassed. Okay, finally, the other really, really dishonest thing that Chad did was and I'm going to read this from my phone. Okay, was the text message to on the 9th of September, which is the day after there was the last proof of life for Tylee Ryan. Okay, so this is probably right around the time when Tylee, there's no longer a way to account for her being alive. Okay, and what is Chad doing? Chad has to explain to his wife in a very uncharacteristic way. I'm sure Chad was never this open with his wife, but he sends her this super descriptive text message talking about an explanation for burying something in the pet cemetery and simultaneously burning a bunch of limbs, making a big fire in the backyard. Okay, so it's interesting because this is a terrible coincidence. I mean, it's very rare. It's probably not very common for him to be burning a bunch of stuff. I'm sure they would burn stuff once in a while, but that's kind of an unusual event. So he has to sort of explain it to his wife, right? Very dishonest what he's doing. But at the same time, he has to explain how maybe there was a gunshot heard, and also why they're burying something in the pet cemetery. So all these things in combination. And John Pryor wants to make it sound like, oh, that could be a raccoon, on the very day after Tylee was last seen alive. You see what I mean? So in other words, if we're to believe John Pryor, then Chad, he burned all these branches and he killed a raccoon. And then somehow Tylee was buried right there in the pet cemetery, and she was burned. And she was part of all this burning stuff. Like how can I mean, even if we take John Pryor at his word, oh yeah, maybe there was a raccoon, but we have to believe that coincided on the very same day when Tylee was also chopped up and burned up and buried in the pet cemetery. So I mean, I don't know how John Pryor believes that anybody's going to go for that. And in a way, I think the prosecution is so tied up with all these autopsies and all these other witnesses that it's hard to sort of focus and show how outrageous it is that Chad is gonna send a text message to Tammy, where basically he's making it sound like, oh yeah, I had an interesting morning. I'm reading here. He goes, I've had an interesting morning. I felt I should burn all the limb debris by the fire pit before it got too soaked by the coming storms. I mean, what the hell? He's telling her all this information, being so descriptive, But basically, it's very clear that this is a very critical day when, if there's going to be any burning, that's going to be tied to what they would later discover with Tyler Ryan. Okay, so obviously he's trying to set up a cover story, and I think this is what really is going to hang Chad. I think this is a damning text message, right? And we can see how in detail and how much he invests in his lie, right? And he just lies his ass off. I mean, so he's super dishonest. And he goes, while I did so, and then he wants to connect it to the other thing where people are going to notice, hey, there's a big fire there. Tammy's going to come back. She's going to notice there was a big fire there. He has to make this big explanation for the fire. And at the same time, something was buried in the pet cemetery. Because so, maybe she'll see like signs that something was buried there, So, have to make an excuse for not just the fire, but also what was buried in the pet cemetery. And then he says, and it's also interesting how John Pryor doesn't want to use the word pet cemetery, but Chad uses the word pet cemetery. So it's crazy. Anyway, so Chad then says, and he goes, while I did so, I spotted a big raccoon along the fence. I mean, it just sounds like complete fiction, right? And he goes, I hurried and got my gun. And while he was still walking along, I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. And then he has the nerve to put fun times, like just, he's telling this wicked, wicked lie. And he just puts the cherry on top, and it just shows to me that Chad, in a weird, bizarre way, he's just very comfortable being just wickedly dishonest, wickedly dishonest person. So I guess, I'm just trying to put all this out there because, I still believe they have honest religious beliefs. Okay. Both Lori and Chad. But I think when a person is so dishonest, so fundamentally dishonest, so deceptive, so manipulative, so Machiavellian, so cunning, okay, I think we have to ask whether they acquire these honest religious beliefs through a mechanism of pure Machiavellian dishonesty, pure Machiavellian, I don't know, I guess disloyalty or whatever you want to say. These are people that are just, they're not fully in relation with the people that are even close to them, right? I would even argue that Chad Daybell wasn't even in a legitimate relationship with Lori Daybell because he wanted her so badly that if there was ever any problem in that relationship, he would immediately resort to extreme manipulative dishonesty just to keep her close. So you could even argue that Chad didn't even have a legitimate relationship even with Lori. And I think we all know that deep down. It's kind of funny. I always thought to myself, it would probably be a better punishment if I really knew the case well as a police officer and I had to investigate, what to do when they're in Hawaii. Maybe as a police officer, I'd say, what, maybe we shouldn't do anything. Let's just let them stay in Hawaii because I know eventually Lori's going to kill Chad. And then we can get her. And then we can really get her for, more murders. Because I think if they had stayed together, I'm pretty sure that Lori eventually would have just gotten sick of this guy, because I don't think they had a legitimate relationship. I think one day they'd wake up in the morning. I think Lori would see this useless, talentless, dumb oaf sitting next to her. And she would probably just immediately start thinking of ways to poison him and get him dead. And then you would just have another murder in the picture, because I don't think Lori could afford to divorce Chad because he had too many secrets, right? So I think at that point, I think it was checkmate for Chad. It probably would have been better off just to leave him in Hawaii, just leave him on the run. And I think Chad probably would have lived maybe 3 or 4 months max. And I think Lori probably would have found a way to kill him and then blame him for everything, whatever. But I'm just saying as a joke. But basically the whole point is that this idea of these honest religious beliefs, I think we just need to learn. We need to get wise. I think we need to learn to take note when someone has honest religious beliefs, right? Take note of it, but then see what kind of person is acquiring these beliefs and what are the mechanisms in the personality that allow them to attach these beliefs. Okay. And in my opinion, I think Chad, he's not just a dishonest person, but I think he's a very, very sly, cunning, very comfortable, manipulative, super manipulative, and just fundamentally super dishonest person, even with the people that are closest to him. Okay. And so, whether we call that psychopathy, I mean, you don't even need the word psychopathy. It's enough to say he's a super Machiavellian, super manipulative, super dishonest guy, And I think that kind of speaks for itself. And I just hope in the trial, with all these details, all this autopsy, all these questions, I just hope that we can just look at that one day where he sends that text message and just look at the mammoth, huge, gigantic coincidence, how that's right at the time when apparently Tylee was buried, okay? And we're going to believe John Pryor that Chad really was just burning tree limbs and really just did find a raccoon. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. I think they should focus on that. Okay. And I think that goes right to the big problem with Chad, which is not his beliefs, which is his dishonesty, his total treacherous dishonesty with the people that are closest to him. So, anyway, just an idea, but thanks for your patience and thanks for watching.